everyone, Shanna here, welcoming you to another episode of Worthy Asian, a safe space to talk about generational trauma, Asian parenting styles, and finding our way to healing and knowing our worth. This week, we're talking about the differences between emotional immaturity and narcissistic traits. How we can tell what traits we or our parents or family may exhibit, and what we can do to make change to better improve our lives once we recognize some of these signs. When I first started looking into childhood trauma to better understand my situation and find resources and people who understood what I was going through, I saw a lot of people describing their parents as narcissistic, and I found this very interesting. Being a mental health nurse, I was not unfamiliar with the term, but funny enough, it never dawned on me that my parents exhibited these traits. Perhaps it was just my conditioning growing up believing that they were always right, that it was normal for them to have this power that they needed to exert over me. But at the same time, being a mental health nurse, I understood the severity, the impact of having this term, or for that matter, any mental health illness, to be put upon somebody. And as much as we have made headway in mental health, the fact is there is still a lot of stigma attached to it, and there are a lot of barriers and misunderstandings still. So it didn't feel right for me to be so quick to call my parents narcissistic. And although I understood where these people were coming from and a lot of it resonated with me, a lot also didn't. And so it didn't fit quite right, and I was still looking for that correct term that fit my situation. And my situation only, because again, everyone's situation is different. And it's not to say that these people were not correct or that their parents were not narcissistic. But for my situation, it just didn't fit the bill, and I was still looking for where I fit in. Then I came across the term emotional immaturity. It's so simple, really. Emotional immaturity. It finally clicked for me. Like, aha, of course. Why didn't I think of this before? And there are many things that are similar between emotional immaturity and narcissistic traits. So it can be confusing, hence why I'm doing this episode. So how about we start with a simple definition of both first. Narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder is a formal mental health diagnosis, which is very hard to diagnose because, as you can imagine, or will once I define it, a lot of people can exhibit narcissistic traits, and we don't want to be slapping this diagnosis on to everybody. Plus, people who may have this disorder may not actually be in a place where they are seeking help, unless it has gotten them into some serious trouble. Narcissism is characterized by someone feeling grandiose or grandiosity, which is feeling like they are more superior or better than others, an inflated self-esteem or sense of self-importance. Not to be confused with the term delusions of grandeur, which is more based around false beliefs, like someone believing they have the cure to a serious disease or are here to save the world from some catastrophic event. Narcissists have a need for admiration. They believe they are special and unique and believe others should recognize this in them. So they may over-exaggerate their achievements while putting others down. They may manipulate others into getting what they want because what they want is the only right and true way to do things. They boast about themselves. They see themselves as never wrong, never vulnerable, and can be quick to anger when challenged. They may believe rules don't apply to them and can have a lack of empathy for others because they do not see how their behaviors can affect others negatively because they are so great or perfect. Only their ideas, needs, and desires matter, and they have high and unrealistic expectations of others. As you can tell, it sounds very extreme, and that's what narcissism is. It is extreme grandiose. There is no in between. And that's why it can be hard to diagnose because a lot of people may not present with such extreme traits all the time. Then, on the other hand, emotional immaturity refers to a person's inability to manage their emotions in a mature and healthy way. This can look like having extreme mood swings, being easily triggered, difficulty expressing empathy for others, especially when they are upset as well, struggling to regulate emotions and calm down. They can lash out in anger and have a hard time accepting responsibility for their actions and often blame others. They struggle with communication and have a hard time expressing themselves, which ultimately leads to misunderstandings and conflicts in relationships. They tend to play the victim, and mind reading comes into play often, where it's used as an excuse when they are unable to meet an expectation, like, well, I can't read your mind. But at the same time, they have this expectation of others to be able to read theirs and do everything to their liking and become upset if they don't have their expectations met. Seemingly small things can get blown out of proportion. So you can see where there are similarities between narcissism and emotional immaturity. The big difference for me that helped me differentiate which fit my situation better was that I truly believe that my parents don't think that only their needs matter or that they are superior to everyone. And I would say, actually, that they lack self-esteem. It is their emotional immaturity that makes them unable to take responsibility for their actions, that make them seem like they only care about themselves. And they are only superior and only perfect when they are lashing out and unable to take accountability. And it's not that they don't have empathy, it's that they can't express it. So, for example, if they feel guilty or bad about something, it's just too much for them to handle. So instead, they lash out and get angry and deny any wrongdoing. Both are extremely difficult things to deal with, whether if you have these traits yourself or have to deal with close ones who do. Both of these situations require the individual to have the capacity for self-awareness and reflection, and the desire for personal growth, which is very hard for people with these traits for obvious reasons. And though you can have compassion for that, I also personally know that it is extremely frustrating. Having parents with these traits and growing up in such environments leave us feeling like we don't matter. We are always wrong, we know nothing, we are responsible for their needs, well-being, and happiness. We can also grow up to have the same traits, or search for friends, partners who have these traits, because it is all we know, and what we know feels safe, even when it feels awful. And this is how the cycle continues. I am at a place now where I can admit that I was and still can be emotionally immature. I definitely had the sense of always needing to be right, and arguments or debates with friends or my husband would turn into full-blown fights because I was unable to regulate my emotions and I would lash out. I would never say sorry first to my husband, even if I knew it should come from me first. And my husband recently expressed to me like he felt he couldn't have feelings around me because I would take them on and I would feel them bigger and be louder. Like I was the only one allowed to be upset. I would take over, and then suddenly he would need to be the one who needed to be calm. We were actually having a heated argument about it, and I was amped up. I had my comeback ready, and boy, was he gonna get it. But then he said that, and it just took the fire right out of me. Like, damn, he's so right. And it really dawned on me that that was how I grew up. I was never allowed to be upset. Only my parents were. He put into words what I never even noticed was an issue. And that's why it's hard for people with these traits to make change, because they don't even know that they're doing it. In this situation, it would always somehow return to revolving around my parents, their needs, and somehow everything was again my fault. I distinctly remember, and probably am still traumatized by the memory, of when my pet gecko passed away. I was in first year university, still living with my parents at the time. I was sad. I told my mom about how my friend from school wanted to come over and support me in burying him. My mom, who has never really taken to my gecko, who rarely does anything with me, was so offended that I wasn't burying him with her, and she completely freaked out. Screaming and shouting about how I am so ungrateful to her that I never think of her, and didn't I know who even got me the gecko? Her, of course. And she got so mad that she hid his body from me. I never got to say goodbye properly. To this day, I have no idea what she did with him. Ugh. Sometimes it makes no effing sense how they react and what they do. And looking back, I know my mom had hurt feelings and she did not have the emotional capacity to handle that better. But it doesn't make it easier to give compassion and understanding while still somehow honoring myself and acknowledging how messed up that was. And although I know intrinsically that giving compassion to my parents for their immaturity, for their own trauma that they haven't been able to work through, doesn't make what they did to me okay, it still feels like I'm saying, oh, that's okay, when it really isn't. And I'm still figuring out on how to make this feel different. But truthfully, I just don't know how. If you have any tips about that, I'd love to hear it. And in speaking about not being able to feel emotions around my parents, this also meant I felt like I wasn't allowed to be happy. Because they were so down in the dumps all the time. What right did I have to be happy? And suddenly, as an adult, I realized that my happy moments, like having money to travel or buy a home, having great friends, finding an amazing partner and father to my child, having a beautiful and joyous wedding, only brought my parents pain. It only reminded them of what they never had, and they couldn't be happy for me. I remember times when my mother expressed gratitude and relief when I was sad. Like when I had fights with my friends, or when I moved to Scotland and couldn't bring my cats for 2 years because of COVID, under the guise of caring for me because my friend wasn't that good of a friend anyway, or my cats were so much work. And well, you can't be mad at her for that, can you, when she's supposedly just caring for you, right? So anyway, if you grew up in a household with narcissistic traits or emotional immaturity, I just want to say, I see you. I know it was hard, and likely continues to be hard. And I urge you to take some time and reflect. How have these traits showed up in your current adult life? Can you notice them in your own behaviors, in your partners? And if you're still in close contact with your parents, what things are they still doing, and how does it affect you or your family? It's really hard to recognize these things in yourself and those you love, because it often means you may need to make changes, and changes are scary and unfamiliar. It feels easier and safer to stay where you are, even if that means you feel stuck. I am lucky to have found myself a supportive and loving partner one that does not reflect these behaviors that I am used to. But he and I noticed a lot of these things about me, and I'm working on them, and it will likely be a forever ongoing process on improving these things. But I'm putting in the work and I can tell the difference, and so can he. And I think ultimately, so can my daughter. I've spoken to my daughter before, and I really think she comprehends the difference between the way we interacted when she was 3 and the way that we interact now that she is 4. Improvements have been made, and that's all I can hope for and ask for, is that I continue to improve. Because this won't happen overnight. These traits that you are used to, that you have built into your habits, these built over years. And so it will take years to break them down as well. And really, I do believe that it does require some form of aha moment, that self-awareness piece. Truthfully, if I didn't have kids, if I didn't have my daughter and the triggers that being a mother brought into my life, I honestly think I would have just carried on in my ways because I was functioning fine. I was getting by fine despite having these traits. Nothing seriously big was happening to me to wake me up to see how bad things were. Because you just learn to cope and survive and put up with shit. We learn to survive instead of thrive. So, what are some things you can do to better your situation? Well, seeking help is a big step. Therapy, counseling, coaching, support groups, finding a safe place or person or people to process your feelings and experiences. Find your people who understand what you're going through and what you need. And if it's your own behaviors that you're worried about, then working through them with someone to maybe figure out what is the cause of these behaviors. Where did they come from? Why do you think you have them? What are the benefits of changing them? And what can you do to change them? Self-care is obviously a huge one. Setting boundaries with people who have these traits that negatively affect your life. Finding activities that bring you rest and joy, and activities that take care of you physically, mentally, and emotionally. Learning some healthy communication skills can be helpful, like I statements and bringing conversations back to the facts when they go astray. Using the word and instead of but. Learning how to assert yourself while still having empathy for others. Saying things like, I see where you're coming from and this is where I am coming from. Or I can see why this situation made you feel or do ABC, and these are the reasons why I feel or did XYZ. It's about acknowledging what the person says or feels while also relaying what you feel. And sticking to the facts versus subjective things that might not be the truth for someone else. So, for example, you would say something like, I feel upset and unheard when you interrupt me and yell at me. Versus, you make me so mad when you act all crazy. Because those two statements will have very different conversations. In the first one, you're using I statements about how you feel, and you are sticking to the facts about the being interrupted and being yelled at. Whereas in the second part, you are doing you statements that automatically put someone in a defensive state, and you're using words like crazy, which doesn't really describe what actually happened, and nobody likes to be called crazy. Of course, there's no guarantee that having good communication skills are going to get you the outcomes you want, but it gives you a better chance. The tricky part is remembering these skills when you are angry and upset and in a heated argument. The next thing that you can do to better your situation is probably the hardest. It is acceptance. Accepting that your parents are unlikely able to change how they interact with you. Accepting that they really can't help it. It's their instinct, it's their basic nature at this point. So you have to find a way to not take it personal, not let it trigger you, so you can let go of any expectations on what you think interactions should look like, and just focus on yourself, on your own growth, your own well-being, your own mature way of communication. Because you only have control of what you do and what you say. I understand, as a child with emotionally immature parents, you just want them to understand how they hurt you. You just want them to get it, and you want it so bad. And if they could just see, you think that will make it stop. But sadly, they can't. They can't see it. They don't get it. They can't stop. And they probably never will. They just don't have the capacity for it. They don't have the skills, the know-how. Their brain is not wired that way, even though it seems so simple that it is exasperating. They just don't have the capacity, and that can be hard to understand. It is not worth the turmoil to hold on to this. It's time to let it go. And you leave it knowing something great about you, that you do have the capacity to be different and better for someone else. And that is huge. Lastly, another thing you can do is actively seek out people who are positive role models to be in your life. And recognize toxic traits in those currently in your life and reflect on if there's room for change and growth on their part. How much joy do they bring in your life? And ultimately, is it time to let some of these people go? Because life is short, man. You already spent how many years living this way with your parents? Don't spend the next few decades just repeating it all over when you can have healthy, great, lovely relationships with people. And no, just because you do work on these healthy relationships, it won't guarantee rainbows and sunshine all the time. But at the very minimum, you'll still feel the sun when it rains. Which I can tell you, I really didn't when I was in the thick of it as a child. I saw no light at the end of the tunnel. And you don't want to live your adult life this way, when you are now the one in control. And believe me, I know it's hard, and a lot of the times it doesn't feel like you have control, but you do. You really do. Change can only come when you realize this for yourself. Because no one can do this work for you. Only you can. You have the means to make the necessary changes, to take the necessary small steps that lead you to where you deserve to be. And I'm going to leave it at that. As always, thank you for sharing your time with me. I would love to connect with you on Instagram at worthyasianpodcast to hear any questions, ideas, or stories you have. And if you'd like a space to be able to share, receive, or give support, please join and help build our community in the Worthy Asian Facebook group. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe, share, or leave a review so more people can find us. I'll be back in 2 Mondays. So until then, take care, talk soon, and much love from a fellow Worthy Asian.